People often just engage in compromise without really exploring. And as I said, what makes the best negotiators, conflict resolvers, is their willingness to accept a suboptimal agreement. Sorry for putting it that way, but they realize that there's ways in which they can, as long as they're creative, they can come up with all kinds of solutions to difficult challenges, just like the ugly orange, right? But one of the real difficult parts of all of this is helping people to shift from, because when we go into a negotiation or a conflict in some situation, we have a hat that we're wearing. We represent something, right? And our tendency is to advocate for that, which is fine, except that when you advocate, it's kind of hard at times to also be creative, because you're not enabling yourself to kind of think differently. I work with a lot of political people, and they are under so many constraints, and they have to be very careful about what they say publicly. And so often we do a lot of work out of wherever they are to get them thinking more creatively. And we do this in conflict a lot. I've been involved in processes with Israelis and Palestinians where we brought them to Harvard to get them out of there, and they're called problem-solving workshops, and we bring 5 Israelis and 5 Palestinians, and they come up with all kinds of solutions because they're not encumbered by the situation and the problem they're in the middle of. And that's why you see Camp David. That's why you see these places that are removed, because it fosters creativity. I'll tell you a quick little story about this. So William Ury, my friend, was very interested in why some of the strategic arms limitation treaties, you remember those in the 70s and 80s? So why some succeeded in reaching agreement and others didn't. So he went in the late 90s, early 2000s and met with the American and Russian generals, and he said, what was the difference? And to a person they said, well, it was the existence of the wizards. And he thought, the wizards? Have you guys sort of lost your mind? Like what's... And it turns out that the wizards were these 2 Americans and 2 Russian mid-level diplomats that they would dispatch to a boat in the Black Sea, where they would stay on the boat. And basically their instructions were, we have this difficult problem, you're not coming back off the boat until you give us 5 solutions. They were obviously both fluent in English and Russian, and in each one of those scenarios, they came back with solutions that enabled them to reach agreement. Okay? That's part of what I'm talking about. That you have to set up the process where you say to folks, look, none of us really have a good solution to what's happening right now, whatever it is, okay, generically speaking. So we need to be creative. We have to just throw aside, take off our decision-making hats, put up some whiteboards or a computer screen, and just start getting creative, okay? And so I'll talk about that in a second, but part of the reason why we don't get creative is because when a problem does come up, I'll tend to think of a solution, and so will you, and we'll get together, and you'll say, oh, I've got a great idea, and then sort of like the story that you mentioned before, right? Somebody's got to trump the other. Well, my ego gets tied to my idea, right? And so before we know it, we either have some weird compromise that doesn't make sense at all, or we just disagree, and the process doesn't work, right? And so there's other ways of doing things, like brainstorming. Now, lots of people say, well, brainstorming, I don't know. It's kind of a tired concept. It's been around a long time, but the problem is it works. I've used it all the time. And why it works is because it helps move people from these just common notions and, well, you could do that and we could split the difference, and to something like, what's the craziest idea you can think of right now? Okay, good. Reason we can't do that? Yeah, well, okay, maybe we can't do that. But they build on each other, and what you need is crazy ideas to solve some of these problems. You need someone to say, what part of the orange do you need? Okay? And so this is the part where you are able to unravel a difficult problem. The interests get you there. They start you down that road because you know what people want. Then the question is, how do you satisfy it? And there's probably many ways to satisfy it, but you don't get there unless you get into some form of creativity. There's a great chart in the book, Getting TS, that's called the circle chart. And you can use it really effectively to work through a problem. And I would highly recommend you do. I use it with companies all the time, where we start with the problem, then why does the problem exist? What are we going to do about it? And then what's your role in it? What's the next step that you're going to take? And it pulls people away from this sort of thinking that either you do it, I do it, or we split the difference. And that is very common ways of thinking about things. So you've got to get creative, and I don't care how you do it. Some questions you can use, hypotheticals are great. What if we were to do this? Or under what circumstances could you do that? Or how would you solve the problem? Everybody likes to be asked their advice. Don't hesitate.